lot has happened since the first devlog for Hardcore Homicide went up 7 months ago. I really can't even believe it's actually been that long, but here's why it's been so long. After making that initial devlog, I kept working away on the project in Unity, making slow but steady progress on things like naming all the roads and adding corresponding street signs, replacing the placeholder bridge assets with custom-built bridges that fit the setting better, beginning to play around with shooting mechanics, things like that. But progress ground to a complete halt after a particular Unity update, one that couldn't be ignored because there was a vulnerability detected in the outdated version that I was using. And this update completely broke my project. Assets were corrupted, and I couldn't even get the project file to open at first. After a lot of troubleshooting, I eventually got the project to open, but it would hard crash anytime I tried to run play mode. I spent months off and on trying to fix this problem to no avail. I kept thinking I finally figured out the issue, or isolated which corrupted asset was causing the issue, and then trying to fix it, or just biting the bullet and deleting the asset in question altogether, but nothing worked. I eventually figured out that it was something about the Unity terrains themselves that was corrupted by the update, which is basically the entire ground and mountains and all the surface area of the entire game world, which is where I spent the majority of my time with Unity, getting that to, into a state that I was happy with. So that really sucked. I spent so many hours painstakingly painting that world map of the game by hand, and the update just completely bricked those terrain tiles and made them useless. This was extremely demotivating and led to me really slowing down work on the game for a bit. I never put down the game entirely, but months did go by without me attempting any work in Unity. Instead, I spent a lot of time in Blender and also drafting up more floor plans by hand on grid paper, really focusing on getting a bunch of the game's locations built out. I also shifted priorities for a time to get my third novel finished up, and that went well. My third book, Blood, Acid, Money, is finished and edited, and I'm in the process of talking to potential managers and publishers. After getting that book squared away, I started on my fourth novel, made a ton of progress on it, but lately I've been trying to build up steam on the video game again at the same time. Now, there was some work I did in Unity that could have been transferred over to a new project file, but it became clear that there was very little that was salvageable about the Hardcore Homicide Unity project file. I had backups and whatnot, but it didn't matter. They were all screwed up by this infuriating update. There were definitely certain assets and systems and other things that I could transfer over to a fresh Unity file to start over, but the thought of that is just miserable to me. Like I said, the terrains were where I did most of my work in Unity, and with those rendered unusable, it really felt like starting from square one. And if I really am going back to the drawing board as far as the in-engine work is concerned, then I decided to take the opportunity to explore my other options again. When I was looking into engines before, I'd seen a lot of talk about how Godot was the exciting new engine on the block, and how it was really good for 2D, but not that good for 3D. However, now that a bunch of time has passed, it seems like Godot has progressed a ton in a relatively short amount of time, and it now seems more than capable of handling just about everything I'm looking to do in Hardcore Homicide. The one thing that's currently missing that I foresee being a potential issue is official integration with Artisy Draft, which is the program I'm using for the branching dialogue system of the game. But I've seen some workarounds, and I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. And who knows, at the rate that Godot is progressing, it might even end up with official Artisy integration sooner rather than later. One of the big things that really compelled me about Godot was its open source nature and general ethos. It's certainly a whole lot more ethical than Unity, for one thing, and I appreciate the similarities that it has to Blender, which has been my favorite game dev discovery since beginning the process. I love Blender, and I'm someone who never thought I would have any interest in 3D modeling. But anyway, back to Godot. I really like how simple and clean Godot is, and even just how fast it runs. The program itself is so much leaner than its competitors, and it runs without putting my computer into overdrive immediately, unlike Unity. And I haven't really fiddled around with Unreal, but I've heard it's even worse there in terms of the demand on your CPU. So yeah, switching the project over to Godot is a major setback, but I do believe that it will yield stronger results in the long run. I'm only at the very, very beginning of exploring Godot, but I really like what I'm seeing so far, and I've found it to be much more intuitive than Unity, which continued to just seem needlessly obtuse to me right up until the end. I never really felt like I had a good handle on Unity to begin with, so as far as software familiarity goes, there's much less of a setback there. But really the bulk of the progress I've been making in all this time has been on the design and art side of things. I've improved a lot in Blender since that first devlog, and I've made a ton of progress building up a bunch of the game's locations and props for the game. I also spent a long time learning how to properly texture these props and locations to get results that I like for the style of the game. I initially tried to learn how to do these things the proper way, but found myself getting so frustrated and not understanding how things like UV unwrapping worked. I looked around for shortcuts and I tried a couple of things. For a little while I was working in this relatively new program called Instamat, and I got a couple of results that I kind of liked the look of, the stylized look of. But just like Unity, I found the software needlessly obtuse and confusing to use. Even with a couple of models I got that I ended up liking the look of, I never really felt like I knew what I was doing in Instamat. I kind of just arrived at a result that I sort of liked by accident. And the software was extremely buggy and prone to either crashing or just not doing what it's supposed to do until I repeated the same steps 4 or 5 times. So I ultimately left Instamat behind, and I took another crack at learning how to texture the proper way back in Blender. I took the time to sit down and watch some tutorials and read the documentation and learn how to properly UV unwrap models. And to my surprise, it was tricky, but it did eventually click, and I now understand how to do it correctly. And so I started texturing a bunch of the models that I had been making already. And you know what? I can hardly believe it, but I've actually been having fun texturing these models. I thought for sure I was going to dread this process, but I actually kind of enjoy it. It's great seeing these objects and locations really come to life. It's much easier to bring them into Godot than it was with Unity in my experience too, and popping them in fully textured and being able to walk around the 3D space right away is really fulfilling. It helps me feel like, yeah, this is a real game, it's actually coming together, which was surprisingly really easy to lose sight of in Unity or in a vacuum when the models weren't leaving Blender because the Unity file was busted for so long. But overall, I've been making a lot of progress in this area. The numbers might end up changing, but the plan is for the finished game to feature 103 unique, fully explorable locations within the big hub world that's also fully explorable. Part of giving the player the sense of truly solving a mystery, which is the ultimate goal of Hardcore Homicide, means providing that needle in a haystack sort of feeling. So there must be many fully realized locations to investigate. Of those 103 locations, I've finished the floor plans for 45 of them, so getting close to the halfway point. And I actually made it a point to get most of the more complicated and challenging floor plans done first, so the back half of that list I expect to move a little quicker than the first half. Of those 45 completed floor plans, I've finished building 12 of those locations in Blender fully, which includes the interiors and exteriors, and includes all of the key items and props for each locations, but not all of these smaller set dressing type items. Of those 12 completed models, I've fully textured 3 of them. And this is actually moving at a pretty good pace since I only learned how to properly UV unwrap and texture about a week ago at the time of recording. There were 3 extra locations that I had fully textured in Instamat, but I'm going to go back and redo those from scratch in Blender, so I'm not counting them yet. So clearly there's still a long, long way to go, but I'm feeling pretty good about progress at this point and feeling extremely motivated again after that whole Unity debacle really killed my motivation for a time. If you want to follow along with the progress of this game as development continues, be sure to subscribe right here. I'll see you next time. So long.